What is going on, folks? My name is Spice. This is Spice Can't Fish. So today I figured I would just bring you guys a little sit down video. I don't really like to film this type of video. It is kind of annoying for me to film them as well as just editing them in general, but you guys seem to like these style of videos, so I figured I'd do one since I'm kind of running out of content at this point. So I got a few sit-down style videos that I'm going to be filming over the next few days that you guys will probably see over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully I'll have some unboxings and be able to get some other content up for you guys as well. But for right now, we're going to be starting off these sit-down style videos with my rod and reel arsenal going into the 2023 season. So yeah, I do one of these videos every single year, I think, just to let you guys know what I'm using, update you guys on all the rods and reels that I'm using. It does tend to change a little bit every single year. A lot of these rods are going to be very similar from what you guys saw last year, but there are going to be a few new rods and reels here and there. Now, to be 100% honest with you guys, this is actually the third time I've tried to film this video. For whatever reason, I keep talking and just wasting so much time, and it ends up being a super long video. The first time I filmed it, it ended up being almost 2 hours of me talking about these rods and reels. The second one wasn't much better. It was about an hour, so we're going to try and cut this thing down. Hopefully I'll try and get through this video in about a half hour for you guys. But yeah, we're going to go through all of my conventional rods and reels today. I actually have a couple of swim bait rods and reels that we're not going to talk about right now. I got a separate video that I think I'm going to be going over all my swim bait stuff, and I'll talk about those rods and reels in that video. But for right now, we're going to go over all of my conventional stuff. You guys will probably notice most of my rods and reels are very different. I think I have one of each for pretty much all of my rods and reels. Don't have two of the same for pretty much anything. And at least as far as the rods go, they're all from different companies, I think. As far as I can tell, there might be one or two that are from the same company, but overall, all the rods are from different companies. But you guys will see a lot of consistency, at least in the reel company. I do use a lot of Shimano's, so you guys will see quite a few Shimano's in my lineup. That is just kind of the reel company that I tend to gravitate towards. I've used Daiwas, I've used Luz's, I've used Abu Garcia's, but just for whatever reason, ever since picking up my first Shimano, I've just absolutely loved them. So I've been kind of slowly but surely switching over all of my reels to Shimano's. But yeah, enough of me talking like this. I think we're just going to kind of get into each of the rods. I'm going to go from the shortest rod, the smallest rod, all the way up to my biggest rod, and we'll just work our way down the lineup. But yeah, anyway, I guess we'll start with the spinning rods. This is going to be my lightest first spinning rod that we're going to be talking about. This is a 6'6". The rod is a Fluger Monarch, and the reel is an Abu Garcia. I think it's the Ultramax. Yeah, the Abu Garcia Ultramax. Now, this is a pretty inexpensive combo overall. I think each of these rods and reels came with a different rod and reel. So the rod came with a different reel, and the reel came with a different rod. But the reel crapped out on me, and I broke the rod, so I ended up switching the reel onto the rod, and that's how we came up with this combo. But yeah, this is kind of like my go-to spinning rod. For whatever reason, I tend to gravitate towards this one. It is a little bit lighter than the other one that we'll get into in a minute, so I think that might be part of it, just because I tend to throw really, really light stuff on spinning rods, and everything else, as you guys could probably imagine, I tend to stick towards bait casters. But yeah, like I said, this is a 6'6" medium. It's a super, super parabolic rod. Again, I've had this thing forever, so it's worn down to the point where it's incredibly parabolic. I love this thing. Again, it's like a $50 rod combo, I guess we'll call it, considering I guess each of the rod and reel combos that this came off of were like $50 or $60 each. So yeah, not a super expensive combo, but definitely gets the job done. Again, I don't really use a spinning rod a whole bunch. It's just for really, really light techniques. So I really only use this thing for like a drop shot or a Ned rig, or like a really light wacky rig if I'm throwing like a finesse worm or something like that. But yeah, this is kind of my all-purpose spinning rod. Again, I generally tend to have this thing with me, whether it's on the bank or in the boat with me. I'll generally always have this rod with me for whatever reason. It's never a bad thing to have a spinning rod with you at all times. Again, sometimes these fish just get really finicky, and all they'll bite is something super finessey, so that's what I like to use this for. And generally I either have like 12 or 15 pound braid on here to like an 8 or 10 pound lead or something like that. Generally keep it pretty light, like I said, because I'm throwing really light stuff on this. But yeah, great little rod for some super light finesse stuff. Again, not super expensive. I'll probably upgrade the reel at some point, but overall I think until the rod breaks I'll keep using it. Now, my other spinning rod is a good bit newer, and I like it a good bit less. This is a Matsuo combo. It's a 6'10" medium, kind of a similar action to that other one, but it's definitely a little bit more of like an all-purpose, almost medium-heavy style spinning rod. Right now I got a drop shot tied on here, but generally I'll use this for a little bit heavier stuff. So little tiny poppers, jerk baits, smaller spooks and stuff like that. If I'm throwing like a weightless Senko on a spinning rod for whatever reason, I'll throw it on that. Or like if I'm throwing a wacky rig with like a weightless Senko on it, that'll probably be thrown on this rod as well. And if I'm throwing like a little tiny swim bait, like a 2.75 inch Kitech or something like that on like a little underspin, I like to throw it on this rod as well. But it is kind of a weird rod. I'm not really a huge fan of it, like I said. I picked this thing up in the beginning of the year. I think I bought it for like 40 or 50 bucks from Walmart just because I thought it looked kind of cool, and I kind of figured I should probably get a second spinning rod and reel just in case. But honestly, I'm not really a huge fan of this rod and reel. I think it was kind of a waste of 40 bucks. If you guys want me to to do a full video on this thing, I think I will, but long and short of it is it's really not worth your money. Again, $40 rod and reel, $40 or $50 rod and reel, so it's not very expensive, and you definitely feel it, especially in the reel. That reel feels super cheap. Gets the job done for a little bit heavier stuff, but again, it's just kind of a backup spinning rod and reel for me, so I don't really use it all that much. This one right now, I got 10-pound fluorocarbon on, but I'll probably end up throwing like some 20-pound braid on there and then throwing it to like a 10 or a 12-pound leader. Again, just something a little bit heavier to throw that little bit heavier stuff with. Anyway, getting into the actual casting rods, the stuff you guys probably want to hear about. This is my jerkbait and popper rod, or that's at least what I bought it for. It's a 6'10" Ducket Silverado. I really like this thing. It's a medium power. I think it's a fast taper or fast tip. And I got it paired up with a Shimano Ingetsu. This is the BB100HG, so a little bit smaller reel. It's a 100 size reel as opposed to like your average 150 size. But I really like this combo. It's super light. It's really nice feeling in the hand. I think I picked this rod up again at the beginning of the year or at the end of last year, something like that. I've never owned a Ducket rod before, but they always look kind of cool. I know Jacob Wheeler uses them, so I figured I'd pick one up just to give it a shot. And honestly, I really like this rod. That being said, it's a little bit long for throwing a jerkbait or a popper. I generally tend to like a little bit shorter rod for that, so I'll probably end up picking up another rod in the future at some point for jerkbaits and poppers, and I'll probably move this reel over to that. But this rod definitely will stay in the arsenal. I'll probably end up using it either for like a square bill rod in the future, because I like to throw a square bill on it, or maybe just throw like a weightless fluke or a Senko or something on it as well. If you're throwing a weightless fluke or a Senko around some lighter cover, that 6'10" is probably a great rod for that. If I throw a weightless Senko around like heavier grass or something, I generally tend to use a different rod, which we'll get over to in a little bit. But generally, if I'm throwing something around some light cover, I'll throw them on this rod, and it does a really great job for that. And on here, I got 30-pound braid right now to a 12-pound fluorocarbon leader. Like I said, I use this for both poppers and jerkbaits, so that allows me to do both. If I need to use it for like a jerkbait or a fluke or like a Senko or something like that, I can always just put that 12-pound fluorocarbon leader on there so the fish can't see the line. But if I'm throwing like a spook or a little popper or something like that along the top, I'll just take that little leader off and just use the straight braid. Not really a combo that I used a whole ton this year, but I really did like it when I did get to use it. Again, just not something that I throw a whole lot. Jerkbaits and topwaters and stuff like that is a little bit more of a niche thing for me. But yeah, that's the jerkbait and popper rod at the moment. I do really like this thing. Again, it's a little bit long, but all things considered, it's a great rod. Next up, we got my square bill / smaller medium diving cranks rod. Pretty much any crankbait under like that 5/8 of an ounce area I will throw on this thing. This is a 13 Fishing Omen Black. It's actually the older version. You can kind of tell it's got a different handle than the newer version of the Omen Blacks, but that's the older version, and then I have it paired up with a Lose Laser MG. This is the newer redesigned Laser MG. It's a 6-speed gear ratio. This is another one of those combos that I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I like the rod. The rod's pretty decent. I've had it for a good long time, so it's pretty parabolic. It's been worn in pretty well. And it's a 7-foot medium moderate, so it's got a great action for throwing a small square bill. It really helps stick those little treble hooks in and keep them pinned. I don't ever really lose fish on this thing. It's very rare that I lose fish on this combo. I don't know if that's just because I get lucky or just because of the rod or whatever it is, but I tend to have a pretty good hookup ratio with this thing. The reel, on the other hand, I'm not super stoked on. It's alright, it's fine. It's a $70 or $80 reel. I think I picked this up a couple of years ago just because I needed a new crank and reel and just wanted something relatively inexpensive. And this was like the only option in the local tackle shop that I could find under that like $150 price point, so I figured I'd pick it up just so I could have something inexpensive. I don't really throw a square bill or a crank all that much just because I tend to fish around areas with a lot of grass in them, but when I do throw a crankbait or a square bill, this is the rod that I throw it on most of the time, and seems like it does the job pretty well. If you guys want to see a full breakdown on this Lose reel, I actually have a 1 year later full review of this thing. I'll leave that link down in the description for you guys if you want to go check it out. But that's a pretty solid video, just giving you guys a really good breakdown of that reel if you want to know my final thoughts and opinions on it. Overall, pretty solid combo. Like I said, I don't use it a whole ton. I think the reel kind of brings the whole combo down a little bit, but the rod itself is pretty good. And overall, I haven't really had any issues with this thing, so I can't complain that much. And then kind of the opposite of that, we've got another combo right here where I love the reel. I'm not so sure about the rod. So this is a Favorite Phantom. This is the rigged series of the Favorite Phantom, so it's like the John B collaboration with Favorite. If you guys don't know, back in the day, Guggen and Favorite used to work together. At some point though, they parted ways and Favorite discontinued these rods, so I figured I'd pick one up. They were on sale at the point when I tried to pick one up. Originally I wanted the 7'2" medium heavy just for throwing like some jigs and stuff because I don't really have a dedicated jig rod yet. But yeah, I ended up picking up the 7 foot just because that's really all they had left in stock. So this is a 7 foot medium heavy fast action action, or that's at least what it's rated for. The thing about the rigged version of the Phantoms is they're actually a little bit beefier than the regular Phantoms, so it's a little bit closer to like a heavy than a medium heavy. But yeah, I use this rod for pretty much whatever I want. It is a pretty versatile rod. Like I said, it's a 7-foot medium heavy, so that's probably one of the most versatile actions of a rod that you can possibly get. It is a little bit beefier, so I tend to use it for like Texas rigs and like finesse jig stuff like that. If I'm crawling a jig along the ground, or if I'm just doing some pond hopping and stuff like that, I'll generally throw like a Texas rig on this rod. Just because it is a little bit beefier, so it will give me a little bit more backbone setting the hook either through that plastic or through that brush guard. Generally like to throw that on this rod. I've also started recently throwing a lipless crankbait on this rod. I really like throwing a lipless on this rod as well. It just has a little bit more backbone, like I said, so you can really rip that lipless out of grass if you get it stuck in grass. It gets a really great reaction strike if you can get a fish that's just kind of watching it. I know a lot of people have a lot of success throwing a lipless and just ripping it out of grass. A lot of times the fish will be following it through that water. It'll see that bait get stuck in the grass, and then when it rips free of the grass, that fish will just kind of hit it out of instinct. And a little heavier tip just lets me pop that bait a little bit harder, get it out of the grass a little bit easier. So I do like it for a lipless crankbait as well. Now, like I said, this reel on here is probably my favorite Shimano that I have out of at least all the casting ones that I own. This is a Shimano Scorpion DC. It's the DC7. This is the older version of the Scorpion. I think this is one of the first versions of the Scorpion that they actually put the DC chip in, and this one's really interesting because it actually doesn't make the DC noise. It has the DC chip in it, but it doesn't actually make that whining noise that everybody knows so well. But yeah, I really like this reel. I haven't gotten it out on the water a whole ton. I only picked it up at the end of the season. By the way, shout out to Brett over at Beebs Big Baits for hooking it up with this reel. He gave me a great deal on it, so really big shout out to you, man. I'm stoked to finally have one of these things in the arsenal. And yeah, just really complements the whole overall appearance of the rod. I don't really care that much about what my rods and reels look like, but it is really sweet looking, you gotta admit. It's got that little red accent in there on the little spool and on the little dial over here as well. That just matches up perfect with the little red accents on the rod and stuff. But yeah, sweet little reel. Again, it's a 7-speed reel. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's a 7.0 to 1, so 7-speed reel. On here I have 15-pound fluorocarbon. That's generally what I'll use on like most of my all-purpose like heavier rods. But yeah, that's kind of like my first all-purpose do-it-all rod. My second all-purpose do-it-all rod is going to be a very similar one. It's a 7'1" medium heavy. This is a St. Croix Bass X with an SLX DC, Shimano SLX DC on it. This is again a kind of a do-it-all rod. Again, it's a 7'1" medium heavy, so very similar to that other rod that I just showed you. But the difference between these two rods is that while that one puts emphasis on the heavy part of medium heavy, this one kind of puts the emphasis on the medium part of medium heavy. It's a little bit more parabolic, it's a little bit more whippy at the tip. I can't really show it to you guys on camera, but it does have a good little whippy tip. And with that little bit more parabolic action, it lets me throw baits that have a little bit more resistance to them, or baits that are a little bit lighter. So stuff like a weightless Senko, like when I'm throwing it around heavier grass or super heavy cover, I'll throw it on this rod. I'll throw a lipless crankbait on this rod as well if I'm throwing it around some lighter cover, not necessarily ripping it out of grass, just kind of burning it around areas. Then I'll throw it on this rod. Again, that little bit more parabolic action gets me a little bit more distance. I also really like throwing a spinnerbait on this rod. This again is a great spinnerbait rod with that parabolic action. Spinnerbaits have a ton of wind resistance with those big blades and that big profile, so that parabolic action really lets me throw that bait out there a little bit further. Jesus, I feel like I've said parabolic action like 50 times right there. But anyway, I also like to throw a little paddle tail swim bait if I'm throwing like a little 4-inch or 5-inch Kitech on like a little weighted underspin or like a belly weighted swim bait hook or anything like that. I like to throw it on this rod as well. It's a great rod for that. Again, parabolic action, lets you throw the bait forever. Again, I also have that paired up with the SLX DC, which again helps throwing those baits a little bit further. Whether it's super light or a bait that has a lot of wind resistance to it, that SLX DC really does a great job of keeping that reel from backlashing if you're throwing into the wind or just throwing anything with a lot of drag to it. Spinnerbaits and weightless Senkos especially, I've found that DC chip to work really well for. I used to use this reel for pretty much everything. It actually used to be my chatterbait reel, but I've noticed that it really excels for that lighter stuff. Again, that DC chip is really tuned for throwing lighter baits and stuff like that really need that extra help. So I think that this is probably where it's going to be. I think it's kind of a perfect fit. Plus, again, looks super sick on that St. Croix. Anyway, back to another rod that I don't really like. You guys probably don't ever see this thing on the channel. Probably didn't even know that I had this, but this is an Abu Garcia Ike series. It's a 7.3 medium moderate. It's the winch series, which I think they renamed the delay series, but it's the same rod. I bought this rod a long time ago, originally intending to use it for chatterbaits and swim jigs and stuff like that. and I don't really like it. Honestly, I don't really know what to do with this rod. It's not really a great rod for anything as far as I can tell. I've tried a whole bunch of different stuff on it. Again, I've tried a chatterbait, a swim jig. I've tried throwing like a weighted underspin. I've tried throwing like smaller swim baits, some crankbaits on it. It's just like a really weird action and a really weird length. It's too long to be like a good square bill rod, but it's too short to be a good deep crank rod. It's too parabolic to be a good chatterbait rod, but it's too strong, I guess, or too heavy to be a good swim bait rod. So I really don't know what to do with this thing. I might try throwing a spook on it at some point, I guess, because that's about the only other thing that I can think of to do with it. But other than that, I don't really have much to say about this rod. Looks kind of cool, I guess. Mike Iaconelli did a pretty cool job with that color scheme. It's like that neochrome purpley type deal. I don't know, I probably can't see it super well on the camera, but it's a cool looking rod. And on here I just have my Abu Garcia Revo X. This is probably one of the better $99 reels that I've ever used. Honestly, probably the best $99 reel I've ever used. Thing's been solid. I've had this thing for probably 4 or 5 years now. It's probably one of my older reels. I think there's only one reel that I own that's actually older than this thing. But yeah, it's a great little reel. Again, I've had it for a long time, used it for a bunch of stuff. I've used it for weightless stuff, used it for frogs, used it for chatterbaits, flipping, swim baits. It does pretty much everything. Again, it's not really a reel that I use all that much anymore because I'm starting to switch all my stuff over to Shimano's, but I figured I might as well throw it on here just so I can have like an Abu Garcia combo, I guess. Side note, if any of you guys live in the Colorado area, you guys want to buy this from me, I'll give you a good price on it. Not really looking to sell it, but I will. If you guys want it, go ahead and shoot me a message or leave me a comment or something. This next rod, I have a lot to talk about though. This is my 6th Sense MFR series, the 7.4 Zark Special. This is a heavy, moderate. It's an awesome rod. It's probably my favorite rod out of all of my rods that I own. The overall combo is absolutely fantastic. We're going to get into the reel in just a little bit because there are a couple of things that I need to talk about with the reel, but the rod itself is perfect. Again, it's that 7.4 Zark Special. It was designed around a swim jig, but I personally think it's the best chatterbait rod that you can buy. Again, that moderate tip just gives you a little bit extra flinging power when you throw in that chatterbait or a swim jig or something like that. Gives you a little bit of extra distance when you're casting. And also when you throw in a chatterbait or a swim jig and you get that bite, it gives that fish just a little bit of extra bend and a little bit of extra give to get that bait in their mouth a little bit better. But once you set the hook, it gets down to that heavy backbone and just drives that hook home. And I love this rod. It's fantastic. I think out of all the time that I've thrown it, out of all the times that I've thrown a chatterbait on it or a swim jig, I've only lost like less than 10 fish probably, and most of those were from breakoffs, so won't even count that on the rod's fault. That's probably just my fault for tying a shitty knot. But yeah, this rod is absolutely dialed. This reel is somewhat dialed. It's a great reel, don't get me wrong. This is a Shimano Corrado. It's a 200. The only issue I have with this reel for this rod is that it's the XG version. So it's the 8.5 to 1 gear ratio or something like that. When I bought this reel, I was trying to buy the 7-speed, but I accidentally clicked the wrong one, and when I ordered it online, and I guess I bought the 8-speed, so yeah, we have an 8-speed Corrado. Again, not the perfect thing for this rod. I would probably prefer like a 7-speed reel for this rod, but honestly, it works all right. That being said, this will probably get moved up to my next rod at some point relatively soon, and we'll talk about that right now. But yeah, this is my last rod in the arsenal. This is my frogging and flipping rod. It is a 7'6" extra heavy Denali Attack series. It's an extra heavy fast action, as I'm sure you guys could probably imagine. And this thing is just an absolute meat hammer. It's exactly what it sounds like, extra heavy, fast action. There is no give to that tip whatsoever. It's just a broomstick. And the reel that I have on here at the current moment is a Pflueger Supreme. This reel and rod, actually, the whole combo is super, super old. Now, this combo actually has kind of a funny backstory to it. When I first got into bass fishing, I saw tons and tons of videos of people throwing frogs. And of course, being the inexperienced bass fisherman that I was, I figured that I needed a super expensive, super nice frog rod to go out there and just crack toads on. So I went out and put together what I thought was a lot of money at the time. I think it was probably about 200 bucks, and ended up buying this thing. And this was like my first like expensive rod and reel combo, which I'm putting in quotes because looking back on it, I obviously have more expensive rods and reels now, but back in the day, spending 200 bucks on a rod and reel was a big deal for me. And I think, like I said, I've had this thing for 5 years, and this is pretty much how it's been. This reel has kind of moved its way around my arsenal. I've used it for a bunch of different stuff, but it's usually just for jigs or flipping or something like that. But over time, it's made its way back onto the rod that it started on, and honestly, it's a decent setup for what it is. Like I said, this reel is super old, so it's kind of on its way out. To be honest with you, I probably should be replacing this at some point over the winter. It is a 7-speed reel, so again, that's not really ideal for throwing a frog on or doing any flipping on. Ideally, I'd like an 8-speed, which is again why I'll probably be sticking that Corrado on this at some point. But yeah, for the 5 years or however long I've had this reel, I have used the absolute snot out of it. Caught a ton of fish on it, and it's done absolutely perfect for me. This is, again, the older version of the Supreme. I think they redid the Supreme, and funnily enough, when they redid the Supreme, they actually put cork knobs on it. I don't know if you guys can tell, but these are actually the knobs from a Cast King reel. These knobs, as you could probably imagine, didn't come stock on this reel. The original handle on this reel was actually just like this flat black thing with like these little gummy knobs on it. But my friend Rob, shout out to you, Rob, I'm sure you're not watching, but just in case you are, shout out to you. My friend Rob stepped on this thing and bent the reel. So for the past like 3 or 4 years, I've just been dealing with like a bent reel handle, but I ended up going through one of my Cast King reels and realizing that the handle actually fit perfectly onto this thing. So slapped a Cast King handle onto this, and definitely better than a broken handle. But yeah, I just popped on these cork knobs because that's what I had, and then forgot about it. But hopped on Tackle Warehouse the other day and realized that they remade the Supremes, and lo and behold, they actually decided to put cork handles on the new Supremes. So I don't know if they saw my video and thought it looked cool, or that was just something that they decided to do. But if anybody from Pfluger over there on the design team is watching, they want to offer me a job, you guys can hit me in the comments as well. But yeah, that is my conventional rod and reel arsenal going into the 2023 season, at least at the moment. Like I said, that Corrado is probably going to come off of the 7.4, go on to the 7.6. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for me, y'all. If you guys watched to this point, I really appreciate it. Hit that like button if you like the video. Subscribe if you want to see some more content from me. Check and wreck 'em, and I'll catch you in the next one. I'm out. Peace.